Good afternoon, good evening, good rising, good night, depending on the time that you are watching this recording. I am Tayla Andre, Taylor Made Real Estate Easy, and today I am having one of the most exhilarating conversations for me, for the industry, and for all those interested in this thing called the housing market. And so, with us today, we have Leah and Richard Rothstein. They are known for their contributions to discussions on racial segregation and housing policy in the United States. Richard Rothstein is recognized for his work as the researcher and author of the book called The Color of Law, the book that opened my eyes to the truth behind real estate, which details how government policies enforce racial segregation in housing. And Leah Rothstein has also been involved in the advocacy related to the issues and worked on their second book together as father and daughter on the amazing book, Just Action, and what we as citizens, advocates, agents can do to push back on the policies that were previously set in place, purposely prohibiting Blacks, Browns, Latinos, Indians, Asians from purchasing property. And so, without any further ado, my first question, Mr. Rothstein, is like, why? Let's start color of law really quickly. What even persuaded you to begin that topic as a white male who did not, from my assumption, did not have any limitations in purchasing? Why was this important for you?
Well, the theme of that book, The Color of Law, is that the segregation of this country was imposed by federal, state, and local governments. It wasn't the result of private bigotry, although there were certainly private bigots, but government was requiring them to be bigots and to discriminate. That the reason we have such a segregated society is because government at all levels violated their constitutional responsibilities by prohibiting African Americans from living in predominantly white neighborhoods, by refusing to finance African American homes in predominantly Black neighborhoods in the way they did white homes, that this was an unconstitutional and unlawful system. And so I don't accept the notion that the only people who should be talking about this are African Americans. We're all citizens of this country, and we all have an obligation to enforce the Constitution. And my rights are violated when the Constitution is undermined as much as yours are.
If I heard you correctly, you said injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere.
It's more than just injustice. It's the fact that we have an obligation under our constitutional system to enforce constitutional rights. All of us do. We don't have separate constitutions for African Americans and whites. Much of an obligation to enforce the Constitution as you do, and to remedy constitutional violations.
Leah, when your father first wrote the book, was there anything that you experienced? Any feelings, emotions? Is this something that you know, expected out of him, or was like, okay, Dad, this is a different route that you're taking?
Well, it was a slightly different route than what he had done before, but it wasn't a shock to me. I think what was shocking was I read it, like millions of people in this country, and were shocked by the truths that were told in that book, that we weren't taught, and we have collectively forgotten about that history. And so reading about it was shocking and disheartening and maddening, really. I don't think I'm alone in that reaction to reading it, but was I shocked it came from my dad? Not really.
And so, jumping into the book, for those who have not read the book or have not engaged in any form of the literature, what are some of the key themes that the book highlights, and why is the book overall important?
You're referring to The Color of Law now.
I'm referring to just the conversation as a whole, the color of law as well as just action. And for those who do not know, the color of law puts in place or brings forth, these are the issues, these are the problems, this is what happened, here's the history. Where Just Action was an amazing book saying these are the things that we should be doing. These are the thing, like you, the people, not government, even though it is discussed what corporations should be doing, because a lot of corporations today that are billion-dollar corporations that we see every day played a role, but it's us, the people, the everyman, that should be doing in order to hold government and corporation alike accountable.
Well, yeah, as you say, The Color of Law is a book of history, how government segregated this country. And people read it and they said, okay, now we understand this, sometimes emotionally, but now they understand the history. And by the way, the book has been out, The Color of Law, since 2017. None of the facts in it have ever been disputed. But people read it and they said, okay, so what can we do about it now? And I had the plan to retire after The Color of Law was published, but I got asked that question so much that I figured I had to write a sequel about what we can do about it now. And that's why I recruited my daughter, Leah, who was more of a housing expert than I was, to help me write it. Well, we wrote it with the assumption that there is no political will in this country now to create effective national policies to redress the segregation that the federal government had such a large role in playing. But once you have a segregated society, the maintenance of that segregation is largely local. It's the product of local policies and practices. So there's an enormous opportunity for people in local communities to take significant steps to redress the segregation that exists in those communities. We wrote this book in the shadow of demonstrations in 2020, Black Lives Matter. Those demonstrations, 20 billion people participated in them. They were both African Americans and whites and people of other ethnicities. They were middle class and lower income people. They were urban and suburban. It was the biggest outpouring of support for racial justice in this country's history. But when the demonstrations were over, most of those 20 million people went home. They put Black Lives Matter signs on their lawns and maybe in their windows, and then did nothing further. And Leah and I thought that maybe one of the reasons, not the only reason, that they did nothing further is they didn't know what to do. And nobody asked them to do anything. So we wrote this book, Just Action, with those people in mind and people who supported them, whether they participated in those demonstrations or not, to give them a full range of ideas of things that can be done in their own local communities, if only they get together with their neighbors and try to implement these programs to redress segregation.
And not just programs, because you also, I have to say, one of the most mind-blowing for me is when you mentioned when there's a time that gentrification is taking place, visit the local bodega. And you said that they may not have your gluten-free pasta, but what else is there that you can use or you can purchase? Go to the local bar instead of going, downtown to get a drink. And those were so simple. Like, the actions were so simple that it completely went over my head. I didn't even think about it like that, because I used to live in Roxbury, currently live in Mattapan of Massachusetts. You guys talk about Boston throughout the book. And it made me think of how many times local communities are not being patronized, and how those small businesses do end up having to close. But those simple actions can make a world difference for the neighborhood. And so, Leah, it looks like you were going to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to add, what you're referring to is we reprinted a pamphlet that was written by someone named Luke Davenport, who lived in some gentrifying communities in his life, several of them, and he wrote this pamphlet to give out to his neighbors who were moving into these gentrifying communities. And he listed 9 steps for how to be a conscientious gentrifier. And they're, the things you said: patronize a local mom and pop businesses, understand your neighbors and why they might be upset about new developments in the neighborhood, say hi to people, be friendly, send your kids to the local public schools, refrain from calling the police for minor complaints and infractions, like understand the role of the police in this neighborhood and historically. So they're simple steps for individuals to take. And we included that in the book because we wanted to show that, we're advocating for policies and programs to increase investments and resources in these historically lower income, under-resourced neighborhoods. And when that happens, it's inevitable that some gentrification will occur. So there's policies and programs that residents can advocate for adopting that can prevent some of the displacement that can occur from gentrification. So protecting renters from rapidly increasing rents or unjust evictions, inclusionary zoning ordinances. There's local policy that can do it. And then there's also how those people moving into that neighborhood act as neighbors and residents of that community. And both are important. And I think it's a great piece of the book to call out, because what we talk about in this book is that to challenge segregation around the country in our own communities, we need a movement. And that involves what we do, what we advocate for, how we vote in our communities, and also how we act with our neighbors and how we talk about these issues and interact with the people who live near us. So it takes all of us kind of in all of our capacities as residents, as citizens, as professionals, as voters, to just start to take on these issues.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What, if any, feedback have you received, positive, negative, indifferent? And this is for both of you.
For Just Action?
Yes.
Positive. I have received no negative input. I've been traveling around the country, both of us have, for the last couple of years, speaking to groups who are interested in implementing these strategies in their communities, or already are. There are, groups that have had book clubs about the color of law, and now Just Action. There are congregations, there are associations of realtors, there are housing professionals, local government officials, and they're really excited to have kind of a playbook for what they can do to address these issues in their communities that they are aware of with the help of the color of law, but not quite clear on how to move forward to address them. So it's been, the color of law was somewhat disheartening to learn the history of racial discrimination and segregation in our country. Writing Just Action and then speaking to groups about it around the country has been very hopeful for me. I've found that there's so much conversations, action, steps being taken in communities in all regions of the country, doing this work that's and having some success. And I don't think we hear a lot about those very local victories, but they are happening. And it's, to me, very hopeful and inspiring.
And so this is a question for either one of you. In regards to the Realtors Association, has National reached out to you? And I ask this question because I'm currently in conversation with them now about some of the rules and regulations that they have, that in certain states you have to be a realtor in order for you to practice real estate. And, for me, they just came out with a written apology, but that apology has not come with anything substantial to back it up. And, in the book, you talk about possible down payment assistance programs for the National to take on. So it's one thing for like Boston Realtors Association to do something, but it was the National that put together the bylaws. And so for me, I'm like, I never want to be a realtor based on the history, and not just what I learned in your book, but also what I see today and what's not being done and the conversations that are not being had. And so, two-part question. how would you suggest real estate agents approach the National Association of Realtors about changing policy for those who have no desire to be members? And how do you suggest we approach them in order to create some type of fund that does not increase dues for realtors, but uses the funds that they already have to put their money where their mouth is in the form of their apology?
Well, I can start with that, and then Leah will pick up on it, I'm sure. Um, in Just Action, we write about, and maybe many of your listeners already know about it, a study that Long Island Newsday, a newspaper on Long Island, did in 2019. This is referred to as a paired testing study. They sent matched pairs of pretend home buyers to real estate agents, to real estate offices, to realtors, blacks and whites who had identical financial backgrounds, according to the paperwork, identical professional backgrounds, identical educations, and they both looked for homes. The uh, pretend buyers wore buttonhole cameras to record the way they were treated by realtors. And what Long Island Newsday reported, and they put these videos online, and you can look at them if you haven't seen them already at Newsday's website. It's not behind a paywall. They've removed the paywall from this so everybody can see it. What they found was in 50% of the cases, African Americans were discriminated against today, in this era. I'm not talking about something that happened 100 years ago. In this era, 50% of the cases, African Americans experienced discrimination. They were shown different lists of homes than the white, identical white purchasers were shown. They were given different characterizations of neighborhoods, whether they'd want to live there or whether they wouldn't like to live there, by the real estate agents in 50% of the cases. Now, an African American who goes to a real estate agent or a real estate office has no idea that they're being discriminated against. They don't know that a white buyer with similar characteristics was shown different homes, were told different things about neighborhoods. There's no way they have of knowing it. The only way to uncover this ongoing discrimination of the real estate industry is by this kind of paired testing program. There are fair housing centers all over the country that can conduct these kinds of paired testing studies, but they're underfunded and they don't have the resources to conduct these studies. So one thing that the National Real Estate Association can do, NAR can do, is contribute funds to these local fair housing centers to conduct much, much more paired testing than they're presently able to do. Some of it is relatively inexpensive. You can do phone calls for rental properties when somebody with a clearly African American sounding name is told that an apartment isn't available, and somebody else with an Anglo sounding name is told that the apartment is available. So some of this can be done by the phone, but much of it has to be done in person. These fair housing centers require volunteers. They don't have enough of them. I wouldn't suggest that realtors volunteer for this role, but the association can certainly contribute funds to make much more of this testing possible. What the National Association of Realtors would like to do is control the testing, and we don't support that. We think they should contribute to these independent fair housing centers. And of course, when the fair housing centers uncover this discrimination, they can file complaints under the Fair Housing Act and, if necessary, engage in litigation. And in my view, the realtors who systematically engage in discrimination should have their licenses lifted by state housing agencies. And that's something that local real estate associations can make clear to their state governments they support. They want their own act cleaned up so that their agents are not discriminating. So those are two things that a local real estate agency can do, both to get the National Association to support this kind of testing and to get their local states to be much more aggressive in lifting licenses of real estate agents who refuse to practice in a non-discriminatory way.
Leah, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would add the down payment assistance example that you gave. I believe we wrote about this in Just Action. A state association of realtors had what's called a special purpose credit program, which is a down payment assistance program targeted to African American. Theirs was targeted to African American and Hispanic homebuyers to help remedy some of the historical wrongs that the realtors had committed against those populations. Under the special purpose credit program, you can have a race targeted financial benefit like down payment assistance. And that's something I agree that the National Association of Realtors should also be running across the country. And just like everything else we describe in Just Action in terms of the solutions we need, they all take an organized group of people advocating for that change. So in this case, this would be realtors around the country who are members of the National Association to advocate that their leadership take these steps to actually, put some teeth behind the apology that they've issued. An apology is nice, but doing something to make that apology real, to remedy the actions that they're apologizing for, is what's really needed. But just like most of these strategies, they don't just happen. It takes some organized efforts to pressure those in charge to adopt those strategies.
So, yes and yes. In the book, there was the whole book is about, the purpose of the book is to give us citizens, us advocates, ideas of next steps to remedy many wrongs that have been done across the nation. And it was disheartening to hear, I don't remember the city or the town, but residents were being evicted, and they were being evicted for no cause at all, missing one payment. And there was a few people who came together to fight against this, to door knock, to share resources, to say, hey, listen, you don't have to be evicted. You can get free legal help, and there's assistance for you. And it just kind of fell on deaf ears. And because there wasn't enough people, so many people got evicted and never got the justice that they deserved. And it kind of broke my heart, because it's like, you have to get enough people on board to do it. And I've had conversations for years, like National Association of Realtors, but everybody loves that registered R next to their name, that I feel like there's very little pushback against that. It's like, I want to be a part of this group. I want to be a part of this membership. I don't want to do anything to jeopardize that. There's no question behind that. I just felt like it just.
Well, I'll make a comment, though, if you don't mind. You're talking now about renters. Every state, every city has an ordinance and a law that requires landlords to rent homes that are in habitable condition. And when homes are rented that are not in habitable condition, the states and cities are lax in enforcing that requirement. And sometimes people who have to repair their own homes when they shouldn't, when the landlord is required to maintain it in habitable condition, can't pay their rent, and they get evicted. And what you're talking about is a chapter in the book where we describe a program in Cleveland, and there are other cities that do this as well, that provide free legal counsel for people with evictions. Now, typically, someone who's evicted in a situation like this, and apartments that are rented in non-habitable condition are much more likely to be rented to African Americans than to others. When that happens, by the time the renter finds out that they might be able to do something about this eviction, the landlord's already gone to court, and no lawyer is representing the tenant, and the eviction is approved by the judge. So what this program in Cleveland does is it requires landlords to notify uh, the what's the name of the the citywide charity,
The
Leah?
United Way.
United Way, to notify the United Way that they are issuing an eviction notice. United Way sends out uh, representatives to the homes of the people who are subject to eviction and tells them that they have a right to counsel and provides that counsel to them through the Legal Aid Society, so that when the landlord goes to court, unlike most cases in the country, nobody shows up to defend the tenant. The tenant is there with legal representation and can raise the issue of the lack of habitability of the apartment from which they're being evicted and the unlawfulness of that condition. Now, that can be done in any community. And what it requires, as Just Action argues, is it requires a political local movement of people, and the real estate agencies, real estate boards would be very influential in advocating for such a policy in their local communities that would provide that kind of, not only provide counsel, but provide the support that puts tenants subject to eviction in contact with the council in time to defend against the eviction. And this can be
And
done anywhere.
yes, and for those who do not know, here in the state of Massachusetts, we are a very tenant-friendly state. Landlords absolutely hate the state because tenants are 90% of the time going to be right in court, and so we are a super tenant-friendly state. But for those other states that do not have strong advocacy around tenants, there's definitely like organizations that you can reach out to. I would also suggest reaching out to your local, like a 211, which connects you with the state government, um, who would then have access to uh, programming or organizations that could also help. I would also suggest your local church, who most likely has resources that they can connect you with as well. Let's say, for instance, you had a magic wand and you could fix everything. I know this book kind of was that magic wand, but if you could, what would be the top three things that you would alter immediately? Either or.
Well, I would say there is no magic wand. Even this book, it's a collection of a lot of effective strategies that we can implement today in our own communities that have real impacts on challenging segregation and remedying the consequences of segregation. And I can't pick three that are the most important because they're different in every community, how each community gets started, what the most important issues are for those residents, what is the most politically viable way to get started on these solutions. But just that we get started somewhere is the point of this book. And we filled the book with examples of how places that locally organized groups can get started, different policies or strategies or programs, practices that they can enact or change or challenge. And all of them are important. We need all of them eventually. And so it doesn't really matter which one we start with, just that we get started somewhere. So unfortunately, there isn't a magic wand in this scenario. It takes hard work of organizing and advocacy. But we also show in the book with each strategy that we describe an example of a community somewhere in the country that's successfully implementing that strategy. So I don't mean to discourage listeners that it's too hard to do. It's hard work that does have success and that does pay off and is being done around the country. So I can't give you an easy answer to what the top three are because they're all very important.
But there is one thing that everybody can do to start, and this is how we start off the book. What we need in every community, in every sub-community, every neighborhood, are biracial groups, blacks and whites, who join together to begin to select which policy they're going to work on. It could be a white church and a black church that has a common meeting. It could be a book group that gets formed. But without those kinds of groups, we're not going to be successful, because although African Americans are most abused by the segregation in our country, African Americans don't have the political power alone to fix it. And the diversity that I referred to before in those Black Lives Matter demonstrations that took place in 2020 indicates this enormous support both in Black and white communities to do something about this if only people knew what to do. So the first step has to be to create these kinds of biracial relationships. We describe a number of them at the beginning of the book about how people can get started. And then they can review the history of their own community, the various things, issues that we describe in Just Action, from which they can choose for an initial target of something to reform. And as Leah said, every community will choose something different. But so long as they get started, that's what's important, because each victory will build and create momentum for more victories.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to throw this out there. I'm an audiobooker. So I don't have a physical copy of the book, but both of them I have in my library on Audible. I don't know if there's like an index in the book, or if there's a handbook or something tangible or digital where I can say need help with rentals, and there's like an index of different what's in the book as far as suggestions are concerned, page number, this, and like the ability to contact the organization that you made mention to. So if you made mention to Tailor Made in Boston, being able to have that information for Tailor Made for people to reach out and say, hey, when you did this advocacy, how did you, like, someone to connect with? Does that currently exist in the physical copy of the book, or is that something that I know, Richard, you're about to retire, you're done. But Leah, is that something that you thought of, or something that could possibly be in the future?
It is, and there's a few different ways of getting that information right now. So there, in the index, we worked really hard on the index to try to make it usable in that way. I don't have the index in front of me right now. I believe it's under local committees can, and then we list all of the actions that and strategies we describe in the book and where they're described. So, and the page number. So that's one way to sort of a quick access in the book of where to find the information about different strategies. We've also released a list. It's called a list of just actions, another list of the strategies that we describe in Just Action that will be included in the paperback, which comes out in March. And it's also on our website, which is justactionbook.org under resources. So you can download as a PDF that list of all of the strategies discussed in the book with the page numbers where they're discussed. So that's sort of where to find the information in the book. And then to find who we describe in the book and how to contact them, that's a little, you have to find the section where we discuss it and go to the end notes and see what the comments are about where we found that information. We also have a Substack column. It's justaction.substack.com, where we're continuing to write about, yep, it's right there. You can click on the Just Action on Substack. We're continuing to write about these issues on that Substack column. And there's one column from a few months ago called Resources for Just Action, I believe it's called. And in that one, we've listed out a lot of the national resources about the different strategies we discussed. So if you want to know more about community land trusts, you can go to Grounded Solutions website. If you want to know more about inclusionary zoning policies, we give you the national resource to get more information on those policies and issues. So those are a few different ways to access that information. It's not all in one place like you described, but you have to sort of work with the text to find it, but it's all out there.
Well, I just wanted to thank you, because I didn't have a physical copy. And so that hopefully you go out and get the physical copy as well, because I couldn't answer my own question had I had the book in hand.
Well, let me just add, Tayla, that Of course, you mentioned that there are references to Boston in the book. Of course, there are. There are references to communities all over the country. And we tried to get some examples from many, many different places. But clearly, we can't have in the book examples from every place of each tactic and strategy that we propose. So you're going to have, once you have a group that wants to take action on these issues, you can find the groups and the organizations in your community that can support this. I do hope you will encourage all your other young people who are watching you to read real books. They're actually quite interesting and fun.
I'm guilty. Listen, okay, so even though I'm really bad at it, I do have an amazing 19-year-old who has read over 100 books in the past like 6 years. So
Wow.
I'm bad at reading physical books, but I love education as a whole. The Not the final question, but the recent lawsuit that took place with the National Association of Realtors, really interested in both of your feedbacks, if any, on the lawsuit, on the business that was created after the lawsuit. Anything that you want to throw out there?
I don't think we really know much. Yeah, we certainly read about it, but we're not in the industry to understand what the real implications of it are.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's been a settlement and the method of compensating realtors has changed, but I really don't know what its effect has been. And it's probably too early to know what its effect has been.
Because you prefaced it with "we're not in the industry," I will leave it right there. Leah, you as well? You have the same?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. As far as regulatory and compliance, when we take a look at Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and we're talking about just action and the actions that have been taken and the research that has been done and the violations that keep coming over and over again, and the 10 million, 30 million, $100 million that's paid out to those that are harmed in 2022 and 2023. What is what is the end stop? Because the history is there. And in Just Action, you guys break down different banks that absorbed other banks that are now these conglomerate banks that have, lack of a term, blood on their hands multiple times, not only from themselves, but those that they absorbed. And then it's still continuing to engage in these actions. It kind of feels like I like running towards the door that seems to get further and further away. When it's $1 billion corporation paying out $100 million and still engaging in predatory practices, what suggestion do you have for those that feel like this is the never ending story and no matter how much I advocate, it's not going to end?
Well, I would say that that's not a reason to stop advocating for those changes. And there are some changes we can fight for that have longer term impacts. They're not just a one-time payout. And so one thing we describe in Just Action is how community groups, advocacy organizations have used the Community Reinvestment Act to ensure or enforce the requirement that banks equitably invest in all of the communities in their service areas. So banks are required to do that. Under the Community Reinvestment Act, they can't only serve the whiter, more affluent neighborhoods within their service areas. They're supposed to prove that they're also serving the lower income areas and borrowers and residents of those neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. They get rated on how well they do that. The ratings, individuals don't have any control over the ratings. That's up to federal regulators. There's sort of not a lot of confidence in how accurate the ratings are. Most banks get good scores, even if they're not doing very well on these measures. But when banks want to acquire another bank or merge with another bank, they need regulatory approval. And in that approval process, there's time for public input. And this is when advocacy groups can have a say in how banks are meeting, whether they're meeting their CRA requirements or not, and how they could do that better. And many community groups, advocacy organizations use this opportunity to pressure banks to bring up bad publicity, sometimes file lawsuits around their discriminatory practices. Banks really don't like that. They don't want their regulatory approval for their merger to be held up. They don't like bad publicity. And so they often will agree to a community benefits agreement with the advocacy organizations in return for those organizations to support their merger. And in those community benefits agreements, banks will agree to open up new bank branches in the lower income areas in their service regions. They'll agree to increase mortgage lending, small business lending in those areas. They might agree to invest in affordable housing development or invest in local charitable organizations. So these are changes that have longer impacts than just one payout. And then, it's a legal agreement, and they can be held accountable towards meeting those commitments that they make in the community benefits agreement. So this is one way to have a longer term impact on how banks are acting in our communities and whether they're continuing to enforce segregation and discriminatory practices or challenging those.
Richard, was there anything that you wanted to add?
All I'll say is that many, as you pointed out, many of these programs of these banks are trivial, they're token compared to the resources that they're obligated to put into this in view of their history of imposing segregation with government support. But the only way they're going to step up is if there's public pressure. And that's why the organization of these local groups of your neighbors, your friends, your book clubs, the organization of local groups that support just actions and that put pressure on the banks, public pressure on the banks, is an essential part of this. On their own, they're never going to do the right thing.
Thank you so much. And so I do want to be respectful of your time. I appreciate hearing from both of you. I am so appreciative for Just Action, and there's a lot of outside the box suggestions of what could happen and what we can do. And so I really love the fact that you guys didn't kind of like cookie cut every issue or every challenge. And it was really thoughtful. I want to take time to say, like, the examples that you gave, that Leah, I can't imagine how much research you put into this. I know in the beginning of the book, your dad said, I had no idea who I was going to call, hint, hint. So I thank you for coming in. How was it working along your dad? How working along your daughter? How the father-daughter dynamic? Do you guys want to do more projects in the future, or is he about to go to Aruba?
Well, it was great. And I think it was really gratifying for both of us in different ways. For me, it was really a real gift of the process was, being involved in seeing up close my dad's impact on the country with The Color of Law. So that has been really special for me to experience up close. And the writing process together was great. I now am in this dual role of his co-author and also his daughter. So I want to support as his daughter, his retirement. And as his co-author, I think the daughter role supersedes that one. So I want to allow my dad to retire, and I'll keep on working on these issues.
Well, all I can say is that having this opportunity to collaborate with my daughter at the end of my career is the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. And I'm so grateful to have had that opportunity.
Aw. And I feel absolutely honored to be able to be here as you get ready for your retirement, and truly thankful for all of the work, the research, the dedication that both of you put into not just action, but I can imagine in some way, shape, or form, Leah, the role that you played in Color of Law as well. And if you have not read the book, please, whether you're an audiobooker or a physical copy, go out, get the book, and have a better understanding, whether you're a renter, you're a homeowner, you're an investor, to better understand the landscape of real estate, to better understand how we got here. And the book says this so many times. You may think that the reason why Blacks, Browns, Latinos, others are not in affluent communities is because they can't afford it. It's not. It's because there were policies that were put in place that prohibited them from being able to purchase when affordability afforded them the ability to purchase. And now that equity has grown amongst these millions of families that were able to use GI bills, that were able to purchase homes, that were able to step outside of those red lines. Now this is the reason why we have the wealth gap that we currently have. And no one is going to rush in and save us. Yes, FHA is doing what they can to right their wrong. And yes, I would have to say Bank of America has been tackled by Bruce Marks and NACA, and so they are being held to that standard. And if we had 1/10 of the fortitude that Bruce Marks has against Bank of America, we could absolutely tackle these other banks and hold them accountable for their continuous lack of action. And so it's just action. We have to take that action together. One person isn't going to do it, and I am excited. And however you call me, pull me, ask me, I will help. Whether it's here in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Georgia, across the nation, I think it's important for us to be involved and to get involved if we're not already. And regardless of your feelings, the facts are the facts at the end of the day. And so I just want to be able to close out, Leah, Richard, if there's anything that you have to add.
But just one thing, we are still, mostly Leah, not me, but we're still traveling around the country, giving talks to groups, to real estate boards, to churches, to bankers, traveling around the country, giving talks about this, the opportunities to take just actions. And if any of your listeners want to arrange for one of us to come, like I say, mostly Leah, but for one of us to come, there's information on the website about how to contact our scheduler to arrange such a presentation.
Mm-hmm. And I will add those links in the chat, and so you will be able to have access to those directly. Leah, Mr. Rothstein, thank you. The Color of Law and Just Action. I also put up the justaction.substack.com. This is what we discussed earlier as far as solutions and next steps. And so I thank you. I love you. I appreciate you. And I hope you guys have an amazing day.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much.